in this video. Jupiter in Scorpio for the next year, the ramifications on politics, on social structures, science structures, election politics, and all of that. So check it out. Okay, so I'm doing this video on Jupiter in Scorpio, and as you can see here with this chart I have, Jupiter has just moved into Scorpio, and I'm recording this on October the 12th, and this is going to be a time with Jupiter moving into Scorpio where there's going to be this shift from the last year of Jupiter in Libra, which started around the middle of September of 2017. And since then, at that time, I've stated many times that I made several predictions socially and generally that have been pretty right on, especially as it relates to things like the Me Too movement. Again, whatever you think of that, it was a phenomena that just kind of really came out of nowhere, with all of these men who were occupying extremely powerful positions in entertainment, especially, and media getting called out, and you know, that was predicted because Jupiter going through Libra, which is very much about relationship issues, bringing things into balance in that regard, you know, was quite transformative in shedding light and bringing more awareness and wisdom into those things. Now, Jupiter moving into Scorpio is going to be very different. First, I want to understand what Jupiter is. And I don't want to be too pedantic, but you know, we have to understand, because we can just start saying a bunch of stuff and not really explaining what Jupiter really is, what Scorpio really is, how those things can come together. Because I'm also going to be talking quite a bit about some of the social implications and ramifications of what we can expect based on the past, based on 12 years ago, based on 24 years ago, and especially the implications politically and whatnot. So I'm going to be talking about all of those things. I'm not going to be talking about any you know, personal for all 12 signs kinds of thing. I am going to be doing that if people want to, you know, join the private group. But here I'm going to be talking about the social implications that we can see and the history of Jupiter in Scorpio over the last, you know, couple, you know, transits. We can go back 12 years, then we can go back 24 years to see those things. And I'll just give you a hint. Politically, it always shows a big shift. So in 2006, when George Bush was president, his midterms, he got midtermed. He lost both the House and the Senate when Jupiter went into Scorpio. You should understand that every 12 years we have Jupiter in Virgo on the elections. So every 2 years after that, Jupiter's in Scorpio, right? If you go back 24 years, it was Bill Clinton and the Republican Revolution that happened during this same Jupiter in Scorpio transit. So we're going to be looking at some of those things, but you want to understand the best way to really predict these kinds of things are to look at the trends and to understand the trends. And it makes perfect sense that Jupiter in Scorpio is going to be very transformational, destructive to whatever is the norm at that time, to lead toward a higher, excuse me, like a higher purpose and a higher vision and a higher focus. And so Jupiter going through Scorpio now will take those qualities of Jupiter, which has to do with finding higher meaning and purpose and our philosophies. And again, sometimes those are religious philosophies and spiritual philosophies. Other times they become political. And it's the same planet. Jupiter in general is the planet of our philosophies. Socially and culturally, much of those philosophies become our leaders and our politics and the politicians that are guiding us. That's what Jupiter is. It's the guide. Not just the literal guide or the literal guru, but it's the teachings and the philosophies that those gurus put forth to us, that we follow, that we believe in, that we rebel against, that we push back against. So you want to understand, this is how we all, generally experience Jupiter energy anyway, in a general sense. We experience the, those qualities of Jupiter as the teachings and principles that we're rebelling against or following. And, it's always a combination. Like, for instance, if you want to talk about politics, there's a political, there's a party that's in charge. When Jupiter goes through Scorpio, we can often want to destroy what's there in order to try to transform it into something higher. Often, it's based on our fears and our realization that we're not in control and a certain disillusion, because those are the qualities of Scorpio. Scorpio is a sign, it's ruled by Mars, this emotional quality where we're trying to develop emotional power, emotional strength. And the feelings that we have become tumultuous and very exacerbated, right? So this is why, especially if we just look very quickly back to the last two midterm elections, when Jupiter went through Scorpio, both times they were extremely transformative. George Bush lost the House and Senate in 2006, and Bill Clinton lost the House and Senate in 1994 with a big Republican revolution. So politically, it's very clear what happens when Jupiter goes through Scorpio. That's very clear. And so there is going to be, at the very least, a moderate blue wave, a modest blue wave, that the Republicans are definitely going to lose the House. I don't think they're going to lose the Senate, but in fact, they might even gain some seats. I'll talk about that more specific in a bit. But the point is, we can look to the politics, and it's not just going to be politics by any means. I'm going to talk about other things. But we can look at them to get a very clear and powerful understanding of what Jupiter in Scorpio winds up doing. It winds up sort of uprooting and ripping out what was happening before, because Scorpio has a lot of those qualities of wanting to just destroy so that we can strengthen and consolidate energy and power. And Jupiter is our philosophies and what's guiding us and what's inspiring us, okay? And, Scorpio also tends toward the darker, again, even sort of paranoid and obsessive option where it's not necessarily what you would call liberal. Let's just assert that. Libra literally comes from the same word as liberal. Libra comes from the word liberate and liberal to some extent. So you want to understand this as well. The last year with Jupiter going through Libra, we've seen a lot of these kind of personal liberating ideas come forth. Again, I use the Me Too movement simply because it's a very obvious indicator, and things like that. There's also been enormous liberation around sexual and relational themes, especially in India. Also, again, we have to understand that India is the world's largest democracy. So India is another great example and another great mirror to hold up to these, to these transits, because it's also quite a conservative country and it's becoming much more liberal. And Jupiter going through Libra this last year showed a lot of liberation around their social issues, particularly the ones that have to do with sexuality and gender and all those things that were mirrored by the Me Too movement in the West, okay? So we want to understand that Jupiter's moving from something that's much more liberal, which is Libra, to something that's generally trends toward more conservatism, because literally the definition of what conservative is to conserve. It's literally to conserve. And a traditional conservative would be to conserve money, to conserve power, to conserve resources, and often, unfortunately, at the expense of the many. to conserve and consolidate around the few at the expense of the many. And this is what Scorpio is about. That sign is also about those things. Scorpio is where we consolidate our power because of feeling vulnerable. For example, a vulnerability, which can also even be like a paranoia if we're not careful. But the positive qualities of Scorpio have to do with the courage to face the chaos that can happen once this liberated energy, which means the energy we don't control, once that gets out in the world, it can be dangerous. This is why even like politicians who want to hold on to power, or let's even just say, again, I'm just speaking stereotypically, not literally, but let's say men who want to oppress women. They are in control then of that situation. They have a control over the situation. If women start to be liberated, they lose the control. So they want to. So this is a sort of nature of Scorpio, not literally men and women, but spiritually and psychologically and emotionally within us, we have a certain amount of control over certain things. Within the realm of within the realm of things that we control, which frankly aren't that many, we have a fear that we're going to lose control. Again, think of a relationship and not any kind of abuse of power. But even just in a relationship, we feel like we have a certain control over the other person and over ourselves. And that's the norm and the standard with which we operate in. In Scorpio, we just assume there's a certain amount of control. And when our partner does things that we don't expect or does things that we can't control, it's the Scorpio part that feels that vulnerability. Like, oh my God, I thought it was this way and it's that way. And I have no control over it. If it's this, then I have no control over what might happen. And then we start to get paranoid. This is why Scorpio can have a kind of paranoia, because we're trying to cycle through our lack of control in Scorpio, because we actually have no control, literally. We could die at any moment with no control over it whatsoever. The sun could just explode, and we would have nothing, there's nothing we can do about it. Or anything could happen. So we operate within this illusion of control anyway, and these external shocks to our control system are felt in the Scorpio energy of all of us. We all have it somewhere. Now, again, you have to get out of the idea that, oh yeah, I'm a Scorpio. Well, what if I'm not a Scorpio? What if I don't have any Scorpio? This is the wrong way to look at it. Astrology is holistic. We all have Scorpio somewhere. And now, with Jupiter going through it, we're all going to be facing this part of ourselves and trying to liberate it and to understand it in a higher sense, which is what Jupiter is. Jupiter brings teachings and wisdom and Guru's grace into that area of life that we all have. Now, of course, if a person has a bunch of planets there, then they're going to be more driven by that part of life. They're going to be more focused on protecting their vulnerabilities and working through that as a much more active lesson. But whether we have planets there or not, we all deal with that energy. It exists somewhere for all of us. Okay? And so this is the backdrop of Jupiter moving into Scorpio from Libra. Again, Libra is much more of a liberated energy where we want everyone to have what they want. But again, that can get too dispersed. Even in relationships, think about it. We all want that Libra principle. Think about it personally, not socially at this point. If you think about it personally, we have this desire to interact with the other person through equality and to have things be equal. That's very much Libra, and we're always balancing those two things. But Scorpio shows the vulnerability that happens once we get into that intimate interaction with another person. Once we get involved in that intimate balancing act, then there's fear and stress and worry because we lose ourselves, we have no control, and we realize that. So what does this have to do? So in this video, I'm going to talk more about the sort of cultural qualities of it. And then I'm going to do another video where I talk about the general personal qualities a little bit more. I've already done quite a bit here, but I'm going to do more of it because we want to understand the energy first. So as you see, this is the chart for now, and we have this Jupiter going through, going through Scorpio. So again, I want to talk about a couple things that also have to do with the culture. And this is a page. This is 2006. This was the last time Jupiter went through Scorpio, or at least was in that area. And at this time, and like 12 years ago or so, Jupiter, we had Pluto redesignated as a dwarf planet. This was back when Pluto was demoted. And it's very interesting because I think Jupiter might have been in Libra at that time. I'm going to go back and look. It was August 24th. I actually didn't look. I should have looked, because Jupiter might have actually been in Libra at that time, not in Scorpio. But I'm going to go back and look anyway. 12 years. October. Yeah, Jupiter was actually in Libra at that time. Oops. But again, it's a similar, this section of the sky. Again, we're talking about Jupiter hanging around several degrees right around these, this section of the sky. It wasn't actually in Scorpio, but it was August 24th. But what you wind up seeing is, this is when the proclamation was made. And I definitely remember for a couple months after that, not even a couple months, but many months after that, you had especially astrologers petitioning the EU, the International Astronomical Union. They were petitioning them to have Pluto reinstated as a planet, and all these gushy, emotional astrologers. There are many reasons why Pluto wasn't, why it was demoted, quote, you would say. And they are legitimate. Some have to do with clearing its orbit, but others have to do with the irregular orbit, because it's not locked in the ecliptic the way the other planets are. It goes in this kind of crazy orbit that's not locked into the ecliptic. For instance, Pluto can be anywhere circling the sun, where the other planets are on the ecliptic. There are other reasons. Anyway, so the whole big brouhaha around it, a lot of that happened while Jupiter was in Scorpio. This is when, and I definitely remember it, because I've been doing astrology for many years, at least for several years at that time. My first book had been published, and I was teaching a lot and stuff. So that happened when Jupiter went through Scorpio. You had the big drama surrounding it, right? And again, this is what we're looking at. We're looking at trends. When I also went back and looked, again, something else that really stuck out, May 15th, again, Jupiter would have been in Libra at that time, but the ramifications of Jupiter going through Scorpio, the ramifications started to really be felt by the time Jupiter went through Scorpio. Was the sequence of the last chromosome in the Human Genome Project were published. And the Human Genome Project, I brought it up because it's so interesting. Of course, they tracked all the human genes. State of completion, I believe. Yeah, so at the end of 2006, the real ramifications and implications of having tracked all the genome sequences and finishing it started to become a reality, and it started to be applied. So Jupiter going through Scorpio, these are a couple advances culturally and and politically and scientifically that happened the last time Jupiter went through Scorpio. Again, like I already said, something that's really important is, if you want to talk about politics, is that at the time George Bush had just been reelected. He was reelected to his second term in 2004. 2 years later, in 2006, the midterm elections, he lost both the House and the Senate. So he got decimated in the midterm elections in 2006. Very much led to Barack Obama and the 2008 election. So again, it was a different landscape at that time. But there is definitely the potential politically for that whole blue wave that everybody's talking about. It could be a tsunami. There's no question. It definitely, I'm quite confident that the Democrats are going to take the House. Just because the political realities, the Senate looks different for sure. But I'm going to say this just as a matter of fact, it could definitely happen where it could be another shocker where the Republicans lose both. I'm not predicting that because I think they'll hold the Senate, mainly for political considerations and the numbers. And again, the reality here is this. We're looking at probabilities, which means to say that you could still have a huge Democratic turnout that, because of the numbers in the House, which means like the voter turnout and the percentages will definitely shift the House. But because of the realities, the demographic realities in the Senate, which means most of the Senate seats, the Republican Senate seats, most of the seats that are up are Republican, I'm sorry, let me get this clear, are seats in states that Trump won by a large majority. So it's much harder just politically to flip those seats. But you're going to see the percentages tighten enormously, which we've already seen. We've seen ever since Trump was elected, primaries and whatnot, there's already been a blue wave. And so you could still have a blue wave in percentage and voter turnout that doesn't actually shift the body to the other side. This is what I'm saying. So, but it could. I'm also saying it definitely could. There could be a shocker. So they could lose both, but they're definitely going to lose one. And that will be sort of paradigm shifting in a lot of ways, because what that does is open up enormous floodgates for all kinds of things that are coming. And this also has to do with the Jupiter in Scorpio transit, because what I see the Jupiter in Scorpio transit then doing is, I could see very likely having the House controlled by the Democrats, the Senate still controlled by Republicans, and this even more sort of hyper gridlock polarity snapped into this kind of dark argument where we're so utterly polarized. We're also going to see during that time, we're going to see a resolution, at least preliminary resolution to the Mueller probe. And again, with the Democrats in control of one body of the Senate, of the House, one body of Congress, articles of impeachment could certainly come forth based on that. I think that's going to happen. Then the other body, which is ruled by the Republicans, perhaps not confirming the impeachment, because in order for impeachment, you need one side to draft the article and the other to then ratify a trial in the Senate. And it would take a large majority for a trial in the Senate to actually convict. And who knows what evidence might come forth, but so far, if there's even if the Democrats, let's say, take the Senate, you need a 60% majority to actually convict in a trial in the Senate. And the Democrats are not going to get that, and the Republicans have not shown any willingness to go along with it. But who knows what evidence might come forth? We don't really know. Aside from all of that, that's not the most important part. What I'm seeing with Jupiter going through Scorpio, and again, this is the stuff people focus on, is me making predictions about stuff like that. We're going to see the energy of Jupiter through Scorpio, which is this gridlock around these issues and these philosophical struggles. Both sides convinced they're right, because let's be clear, if you're liberal, your paranoia is that Trump is becoming an autocrat, a dictator. He's cozying up to dictators, which he has done. He's trying to undercut the rule of law, calling the press the enemy of the people, and all this stuff. That's your paranoid conclusion, is that. If you're conservative, your paranoid conclusion is that the press is the enemy of the people, that they're just out to get the president no matter what he does, that things are going great, and they're going to try to, that the deep state is going to take it away from him, and that the deep state has been trying to do this for his whole presidency, and now that they got control of the House, they're going to the deep state is going to get at work. You're going to hear all the deep state stuff going crazy for the next year once Jupiter goes into Scorpio. Because I'm quite sure the Democrats are going to get control of at least one body, probably the House, and that's going to change the calculus because the House it currently has not been doing its oversight duty. They had pretty much a sham of an investigation into the Russian influence in the election. So many people weren't called. So much wasn't done. With Devin Nunes, it's so clear. And with the Democrats in control, they're going to exercise a lot more oversight, and it'll be a whole different calculus. And again, you're going to just see this polarizing like crazy. Okay. So there are a couple other stories that are really important, and I talked about them recently, and I will, and they have to do with the Catholic Church and the Pope and all this stuff. Again, I started talking about this shift of Jupiter into Scorpio a couple months ago because I've been keeping on top of Jupiter and Libra in most of my forecasts about this is why we're seeing these social issues, the liberation of social issues and all that. And this shifting, especially with the church, the Catholic Church, Pope Francis, and this whole, brouhaha and hornet's nest about priest abuse scandals. Again, this is the Jupiter in Libra. It's the same energy. Again, it's not just Me Too. It's also these priest sex scandals that have blown up since Jupiter went through Libra in a way we've never seen before. We just had today the Cardinal of Washington, D.C. resign. The recent, speeches by, Pope Francis, he's coming out very hardline now saying how, Satan is in control. And again, this is Catholic speak, but very dark with Francis now. There was a recent story that I saw that one of the cardinals, in the Vatican, had these sex orgies. Cardinal in the Vatican, and Pope Francis apparently knew about it, and all of this stuff. I said a couple weeks ago when I did the update on Francis, you can go back and watch the video, where I said that Francis is going to have major scandals come out, especially when Jupiter leaves Libra and goes into Scorpio, because Francis has been benefiting, even though he's getting hammered with his transits, he's been benefiting from the, he's been benefiting. I'm going to just pull it up here. Okay. So this is Pope Francis's chart. And these are the transits right here. This is where the planets are moving, and this is Francis's chart. And I said that when Jupiter moved into Scorpio, it was going to hurt him even more, because when Jupiter was in Libra, it was aspecting his Mars and Saturn retrograde in the ascendant. He's been getting a beneficial aspect from Jupiter for the last couple months, while all this stuff has been swirling around him and calls for his resignation. Jupiter aspecting his retrograde Saturn and Mars in the first has been conferring grace and luck. He's actually had luck the last couple months. Now that Jupiter has left, and again, you want to also understand something. This is sidereal astrology, okay? Everything I'm saying doesn't make any sense in tropical astrology, okay? This is sidereal zodiac, okay? Not to beat anybody over the head with it, but because there are people making it out like we could sort of do anything, I want to make everyone understand this is all based on sidereal astrology, okay, in that sense. All right, so, but this shift now, we're going to see this change of a withdrawal of grace from him, and we might start seeing some nastier stuff happen. Like, for example, proof that he knew of these sex orgies in the Vatican. I mean, this is disgusting that these gay sex orgies and stuff. This cardinal resigning, the cardinal of Washington D.C. resigning over the scandals is huge. And then, again, the bishops in the Vatican engaging in these orgies and stuff, and apparently there's speculation that Francis knew. I think we're going to see proof come out. I said this in the video a couple weeks ago, that his secrets are going to come out. And again, it's not necessarily even that he's abused people or that he's done these things, but of his complicity, his compliance over the years, or as Pope, of covering it up, of enabling it, of not handling this. And I think he did it because he's trying to be diplomatic. Look, it's a hard thing. He's compliant in the sins of the Catholic Church of covering this stuff up, and it's going to get him. And I made the prediction that I wouldn't be surprised if he didn't survive it, if he had to resign. And I also said I think his life might be in danger. Look at these transits down here of Mars, K2. Mars is now right on his sun, Venus. Exactly. Mars is 17 degrees in Capricorn, right on his sun, Venus, at 17 degrees. Now, it could very well just be that a lot of these hits that I'm seeing to him, and whether or not he'll survive it, we're seeing it now. Maybe it'll start to wane. I don't know, because, again, when you look at the transits, Mars is now exactly on his sun, Venus. And I said, if you go back and look, that at this time there would be some major stuff that comes out, or there would be some major challenges. Maybe the major challenge is that this cardinal in D.C. has to resign, and this news story about the bishops having orgies. Again, maybe Francis will survive all of this and somehow, just go forward. He's so far chosen to not really address it. He released a statement and then said, I'm not going to say anything else about it. And that, that strategy is not going to work. He's going to have to come out and, again, have something more to say, because there's going to be more that comes out. So again, this is, these are the things that really are important when we see these big shifts happen, when we see Jupiter shift. Again, last year, right as Jupiter shifted into sidereal Libra, and not long after Rahu went into sidereal Cancer, that's when the Me Too movement exploded. Since then, it's continued to explode. It's continued to gain momentum. We saw it sweep across India, which is the largest democracy in the world, and go through their courts, giving women much more rights, many more civil rights. Now we can face the backlash of Jupiter going through Scorpio. And the backlash is something like we saw last week in the US with Kavanaugh being confirmed. This is very much the Jupiter in Scorpio, a very limited investigation. There's all kinds of suspicion, paranoia, hostility, vengeance, anger, seething now with that liberal group of people in the US who didn't feel like there was a fair shake. Ultimately, it looked like the sort of good old boys circling the wagons and not allowing for a full investigation into the sexual allegations part. Not to mention what you might think of Kavanaugh just as someone who's qualified to do the job. I'm not going to get into the politics of that, but you can see at the very end, as Jupiter is right on the cusp, the last degrees of Libra and Scorpio. And again, this is where anonymity comes into play. Like, exactly where is that Libra, Scorpio, Sandhi, or transition point? What you wind up seeing, though, it's a great example of when planets are at that very end of the sign. You start to see the previous lesson waning and getting weaker, and the next one coming, the next wave coming. We can really see those issues that were awakened in the whole Kavanaugh hearing thing as the waning of the Jupiter in Libra and the emergence of the Jupiter in Scorpio. You see those two issues collide and transform, and it was hard to tell what was going to happen. It was very hard to tell, even when they testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee. It was remarkable. Go back and even look at Fox News. In the morning session, after Dr. Blasey Ford spoke, even on Fox News, they were saying, I think he's finished. I think he's sunk. I think Kavanaugh is done. They were saying that even on Fox. But then a couple hours later, Kavanaugh comes out, breathing fire, and then they're like, oh, I think he nailed it. I think it's better now. I think he'll be confirmed. Even like you see this kind of hysteria, this kind of hysterical reaction. This is what happens when planets get at the end of the signs and they're in those Sandhi points. You'll see mixture of both energies. So you saw the mixture of the sympathy to the female story and even the rhetoric, and then later the paranoia, like I'm hostile and all of that. And literally, I mean, Kavanaugh's testimony was rife with conspiracy theories. I mean, it's couldn't get much more Scorpio. The way, I mean, aside from the details, his presentation was very Scorpio. She was very Libra. He was very Scorpio. So, again, I'm showing this, and I'm trying not to take positions on it because I see it quite with neutrality in the sense of just looking at the issues. Of course, I have a view, but that's irrelevant. You can just see the energy playing out this way. So when a planet is in between the two signs, you'll see this this mixture of energies, okay? And so, again, the reason Jupiter has so much to do with this, with the Pope and with politics, and the reason I'm focusing on these things is, like I said at the beginning, that's what Jupiter is. Most people, again, the solution to all of that is authentic spirituality, which is not religion. Authentic spirituality is not religion. It's actual practices. And it's actual devotion to guru and to higher teachings and to teacher. That's what authentic spirituality is. But most of us, I shouldn't say most of us, but culturally, we don't have authentic spirituality. We worship some kind of religion, some kind of pope figure. And now we've turned politicians into these like religious figures, and it gets mixed with the cult of celebrity. We have a celebrity president. Yesterday, and now, today the big talk is inviting celebrity Kanye West to go and spout all these kinds of philosophies. All of this is Jupiter stuff. You want to understand this is actually what Jupiter is. Get out of the idea that Jupiter is just good teachings. It's the priest. It's the great guru in the robes. It's what we believe. It's our philosophy. And many people, in fact, one of the big problems of the world is we don't have a good philosophy. We don't have a good teacher. We're not following good teachings. We're not following gurus and masters and astrology and these things that are authentically connected to Dharma and Dharmic teaching and Dharmic purpose. That's why I spend time trying to teach these truths. Instead, what we think is true and what we're following are celebrities and the government. Again, this is why when people project all of their assumptions about my political beliefs, I just laugh. I just turn off the comments now because they don't know my political views are. I think the whole political system is wrecked. I don't like any of them. Because I'm not looking at any of them to save us or to save. I'm looking at them to not screw anything up, and they're screwing everything up, all of them, because the system is screwed up. But again, instead we look at these politicians as kind of savior figures. I mean, who would go to a message? Who would go to a political rally to stand there and cheer and rah 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 for somebody? You wouldn't find me at any of them. I'll go spend time around an incarnation of God and see true spirit in the flesh. That's my philosophy. And those are the kinds of philosophies we need in this world that are above the fray of politics and religion. I talk about these things in my astrology forecasts to show that prevailing energy, to show the energy that, because we all can see it. And it takes discrimination to be able to see it without all of your crazy bias. So again, the right has a bias, the left has a bias, and we all have a certain way of seeing things. But I'm talking about these things with Jupiter going into Scorpio and Jupiter moving through Libra, because that's what Jupiter is. And we want to look at the shift from the Libra philosophy that we've had the last year. Again, just notice that big chunk that started right when Jupiter went into Libra. Now that's shifting, and we see it shifting even in the last couple weeks, even in the last week or so, as Jupiter has shifted and has gotten very close to Scorpio. We've started to see these energies mixing. Now there's this vicious backlash against the Me Too movement. We just saw the president get up. I mean, the whole campaign against, or that whole campaign for Brett Kavanaugh, let's say, as a situation we can learn from, was literally a campaign against the Me Too movement to some extent. By the president. Eventually he gave lip service to she's believable and all that, but now, I mean, he's getting up mocking the whole thing at speeches now. This is the backlash against Libra. And this is the way Libra and Scorpio work. We have this great relationship with someone in Libra. We love them. Oh yeah, I want you to be happy too. And then we do that for a while, and then the Scorpio part of us comes out and says, but now I'm not in control of myself. Now I'm not in control. I'm vulnerable. Now I've got to try to get control. And then the reality comes. This is how things evolve. This is how Libra energy becomes Scorpio energy. They build on each other. Libra, we have the relationship and we want the mutual respect. And Scorpio, we feel the loss of control when we give the mutual respect. So we want mutual respect as long as I can still be in control. That's actually what we want. Think about it in your relationships, and you know it's true. Yeah, you want the other person, you want the mutual respect as long as you're still in control, as long as you still get what you want all the time, or you don't have to face your vulnerabilities because their freedom impinges on your comfort zone. And this is how relationships change and transform and kind of destroy us a little bit. This is why relationships are so challenging, because the Libra is just the first part of it. And Libra is the part that gets us engaged in the physicality and in the sex and the beauty and how good it feels to be interacting with another person. That beautiful thing that we feel is the Libra part of it. And how good it feels to make the other person happy. And wow, I can make this person happy. I know this person well enough to make them happy, but that means that we have to face a level of intimacy that's scary, which is the Scorpio. Scorpio is it's really just that motivation, that scary intimacy that's going to change and transform us. So that scary intimacy is going to change and transform us. And if we don't know how to do that, and if we don't understand how that works, then we're going to, wind up creating a real sort of mess around things. And one thing I want to bring up here, because I had meant to do this, but I forgot to do it, is that I'm actually starting a new class that is going to be on psychological astrology. And one of the things that I'm doing here is this whole thing on psychological astrology, and in fact, what you're hearing me do in this class right now, and what you're hearing me discuss and describe, is in many ways sort of psychological astrology. That's actually what I'm talking about, and this sort of psychology between the Libra and the Scorpio energy. And so that whole thing, that whole psychology, which is different than emotions, it's different than the emotions that come from our psychology. It's basically the psychological anchoring and the psychological motivation that compels us to act based on the different signs. Because the astrology signs are literally the psychology, how it feels, and how that motivates us. So again, I'm starting this course on astrological psychology. That's going to be a weekend Zoom conference And these things work out really well because before I only had classes in person, but you can digest this from your home wherever you are in real time. There's also going to be recordings, of course, but so I'm going to go through each of the signs in this evolutionary process of the soul psychologically through each of the signs. And again, the Libra Scorpio one is big because it's where that desire to share forces us to confront a level of intimacy in ourselves that's much deeper. And then we have to unravel our own imagined fears. But unless we do that, we can't have the intimacy. This is where relationships break down. This is why we need the trust. We need to trust another person enough with those intimate parts of ourselves, because if we expose ourselves and reveal those intimate parts of ourselves and the other person then uses that against us, then we're hesitant to trust that person anymore. And in our past, we've all been abused and been violated a little bit, where we trusted someone with this intimate part of ourselves and they didn't appreciate it. So we become hesitant and scared to be open and to share again because of those imagined fears that what if I let this person see this vulnerable part of myself again? Maybe they'll use it against me and I won't know what to do. That's the fear of Scorpio. So again, this whole psychological profile around the sign of Scorpio, or around all the 12 signs, is what I'm going to unravel in this weekend course next weekend. So you can check that out. But this has mainly been to describe the shift from Jupiter in Libra to Jupiter in Scorpio, and to show how we've been on the cusp of this shift now as I record this October 12th. And what to expect when Jupiter goes into Scorpio. I think we're going to see that sort of blue wave at least take over the House, maybe the Senate, but the Senate might even actually gain a few seats, which would make the gridlock even stronger. I think what we're going to see, the prevailing thing, is going to be even more polarizing, because with the Democrats in charge of the House politically, they're going to have subpoena power, they're going to have impeachment power, all kinds of stuff. And that's going to make for just even more vicious backlash from the president and the right about deep state and all of these other kinds of things. And on the left, the sort of paranoid fantasy is Trump's trying to become a dictator and he's doing all this. The other thing I'm going to say that we could definitely see, and maybe even in the short term, we've already saw some of it, Jupiter moving from Libra into Scorpio, even in the last few days, has shown the stock market go. By the way, this happens quite a bit when Jupiter changes signs, because Jupiter is also the prevailing sort of feeling of good. It has a lot to do with the wealth. The wealth that's created, wealth is Jupiter. Money, like cash and resources, have to do mainly with Mercury and Saturn. But wealth, the idea that, we're winning, we're rich, I'm wealthy. This idea of wealth is related to Jupiter. Definitely the stock market, and the idea that, things are going good because the stock market, because our country is growing wealth. That's a very Jupiter and also Rahu energy, but certainly a Jupiter energy. And again, Jupiter changing from Libra, which is about, okay, let's try to work together and work things out, to Scorpio, which is much more conservative. And again, what happens with conservatives is they start to get nervous. And this is where the problem of Scorpio comes from, because we start to get nervous about being overextended. And again, paranoid, worried that, okay, maybe it looks like I have this thing, but it could crash at any moment, so maybe I'll pull my money out. That's all it takes. The stock market is a big casino. And if you think you've got a good run, at some point you're going to want to take your money and leave. Or sell it off or do something like that. And especially now with this exploding stock market, teeter-tottering on the mountains of debt, which was just added with that budget. we could see a major, major, major financial correction. We're due anyway, but this could be a big one. And especially since the tax bill was just passed, where they gave away $2 trillion in tax breaks to people who didn't need it, it's kind of like we fired the last bullet in the gun, because it's that kind of resource as a backup that we would have as a hedge against a financial collapse. And they just gave it away. So there could be some very, very scary and dangerous times with the stock market and the economy with Jupiter going into Scorpio. Could change the whole calculus of the election, which could very well happen. I wouldn't be surprised if in the next couple weeks, week to 10 days or somewhere around this time, we see the stock market crash even more. We see it crash even more. And that will not help Republicans. This could be a kind of thing that ignites maybe a blue tsunami. If something like that happens and all of a sudden all of this gets put in jeopardy, you might see some, MAGA hats taken off and people realize maybe there's been a swindle going on with all this rhetoric. It's strange to see these normal average folks talking about how great the economy's doing because of the stock market. These people aren't getting rich off the stock market. Stock market's making hedge fund managers rich. It's not making these people that go to Trump rallies rich. Those people get rich because of high-paying jobs and investment. And he's in trade wars and all these other kinds of things that literally, these are my personal views, but these things aren't investing in the value of the country and of jobs and all that. Now, to give Trump credit, I'll just say this before I stop. Renegotiating some of the trade agreements, especially with Canada and Mexico, was kind of a wash. It was kind of NAFTA with some tweaks, and he renamed it Trump whatever. He had to rename it something, but it's definitely not ripping up NAFTA. It's tweaking some things that perhaps needed to be tweaked. Okay, give him credit for that. That's fine. There's still all these tariffs, trade wars going on that we're not winning. And again, once you're involved in something like that, it's like you've fired your bullets now. What do you do now? Back down from the trade war and agree that you've lost, but you need to do it because you're destroying your economy? Where do you go from that kind of thing? And, this whole thing is just like, what it's done is it's taken it so that we don't have position, it's the opinion of many that we don't have any room to maneuver. Where do we maneuver if our economy crashes and we're in a trade war with half the world? And we've given away trillions of dollars in tax breaks that would have helped us support a collapse. So these are real concerns that could come home to roost really quickly with a major stock market correction, which could happen, which is predicted to happen as the stock market cycles up and down all the time. So again, these are things that could contribute, especially when we're looking at Jupiter moving from Libra, which is, let's try, there's hope, there's hopefulness, there's negotiations, into Scorpio, which is like, let's conserve, let's consolidate. We don't really know what's going on. Again, remember, Scorpio has this potential for paranoia and getting triggered because maybe we're not as safe as we think. Maybe this wasn't a good idea. Maybe this run in the stock market built on this debt with these trade wars, maybe we need to realize this is a potentially really dangerous thing and start to pull our money out or something. So again, very interesting stuff that we could see as a backdrop. I definitely think we've already seen it, but a correction in the stock market could definitely continue. I definitely see where we're going to continue these scandals in the church, in government, with the church as the government, as a separate sort of government. Again, as you see with the chart of Pope Francis, he's dealing with heavy transits. Mars is about to clear his sun Venus. But again, with Jupiter not aspecting these planets in his first house anymore, he could still be in real trouble. I purposely didn't bring Trump's chart up because I don't want to get so nutty, but I'll just bring this up really quick. Trump is going to change dashas in January. He's going to go to Jupiter Saturn in January. That also does not portend very well for him. Jupiter Saturn. He's been in Jupiter. Saturn is not a good planet for him. It's in his 12th house. It's a major functional malefic for Leo. It's the 6th and 7th lord. And he goes into Jupiter-Saturn in January. Not good. What is good for him, though? And again, he could be kind of neutral, but Jupiter going over his moon, he's going to have Jupiter going over his moon. So it's entering a place that's generally a very favorable transit for luck and whatnot. But again, it's far away. It'll take it a while to get close to the moon. So he could be in for a pretty rough cycle for a while. And then, it won't sort of destroy him as Jupiter gets closer to the moon, like around the summer or something. Maybe, it could very well play out where there's this kind of Mueller report, Democrats decide to impeach, it gets voted on, it doesn't happen in the Senate, but there's all this stuff wondering, will he resign, won't he resign, or whatever, and then something comes and he overcomes it or something. But again, the reason I'm getting into the specifics of all this is because it's just endless drama for the country will continue with this hyperpolarization around the politics. And it could be in the backdrop of a very major financial correction and these other kinds of things. And also social protests against these, like this Kavanaugh, confirmation. We could definitely see where the liberal wing of the country, which could mobilize a lot of young people, a lot of course, more traditionally liberal people around these issues that haven't been addressed. Especially, again, I'll just say this, what should have happened, it was very clear, is Trump should have withdrawn the nomination after all that drama if he cared anything about the country, and just put forth another conservative judge. You could find another conservative judge. You don't need to ram this guy down the country's throat. But this guy doesn't care. He doesn't care how divisive it is. And in fact, he saw it was a good political move for him. That's why he wouldn't withdraw the nomination. Because he thought, this is something I can benefit from. This is something that will bring more polarization that might help us in the midterms. So the hell with the fact that this is not a good person to have on the court. It's not good for the country to go through this. He thought it was a good political move. And this is the danger of bringing someone like that into the presidency. These are the reasons why people like me said, this guy's a flaming narcissist who only cares about himself. It doesn't matter what's good for the country. It's what's good for him and his political ambitions at the time. You could have clearly withdrawn Kavanaugh, picked another judge from the Federalist list, and still gotten your wet dream of maybe overturning Roe v. Wade or whatever it is that you're so gung-ho about, and not put the country through that. The country didn't go through that with Gorsuch, because Gorsuch wasn't a yahoo like Kavanaugh was, who was clearly the most biased. Look at all the judges and the people that came out against him that had nothing to do with the veracity of the sexual allegations. It had nothing to do with that. It's his temperament, and it was clear that he doesn't have the temperament to decide on the law of the land for the next 30 years. And by the way, you might see the Democrats in the House start impeachment hearings on Kavanaugh, because more is going to come out about Kavanaugh as well. I meant to say that. I think that will definitely happen. That could definitely be a catalyst for more divisiveness, more drama, more craziness, and more polarity. So this is what Jupiter in Scorpio is going to be. In every way you can look at it, all the stuff that we've been seeing, imagine this with, instead of just one party in power with the ability to ram everything down our throat, with one branch of government at least having some capacity to hold the line. That's what you're going to get. You're going to get it. It's going to be more polarized around all these issues and all the levers that they could possibly use to curtail the power of a president that doesn't seem to think he has any limits, and two branches of Congress that don't want to put any constraints on it for the most part. So these are the things that you can expect generally. And aside from that, I'm going to do another video that's just about our personal lives and spiritual practices and all of that. As I said, this one is about social implications, which has to do with politics, perhaps the sciences. Again, I actually referred to the Pluto being, minimized and the advances in the science and the genome project, I think it's going to be good for these kinds of astrophysics and astronomical discoveries as well. We may be discovering some more like large planets orbiting other stars, and I think we could definitely find some new bodies, even perhaps in our solar system that we didn't know were there, or new classifications of bodies, new moons of different planets, and breakthroughs and advances in astrophysics and astronomy, like we saw. And by the way, I remember back in 1995, which is after Jupiter was in Scorpio, that's when they discovered the Hale-Bopp comet as well. So Jupiter in Scorpio tends to also coincide with a lot of advances in research, because Scorpio is about research and investigating and new discoveries and breakthroughs in this kind of research, not just in the very large, which is the astronomy and that world, but in the very small, which, as I said, it also showed this is when they wrapped up the Human Genome Project and started really using it and applying it in medicine, right? And so these things are very important as well. I think we're going to see a lot of advancements, hopefully in perhaps some kind of healing research, and hopefully not just ways for pharmaceutical companies to make a lot of money, but actual breakthroughs, perhaps even in cancer research or some other kind of breakthrough technologies. It's a very good, that's a very strong possibility, I think. Again, because Scorpio has to do with research, and those qualities are really enhanced by Jupiter, and his transit into Scorpio will bring out that truth. And again, you want to understand, because Scorpio is this darker energy that becomes revealed. This is why I found this, as soon as I started looking at Pope Francis, these dark secrets of the church. This is totally Jupiter Scorpio. Dark secrets, Scorpio. Trying to control this message because of the fear that it would get out. That's all Scorpio stuff. Coming to light, which is Jupiter. And also the religion, which is Jupiter. So all of the dark secrets of the religion coming out. And by the way, you might see some problems with some religious gurus, some other maybe spiritual teachers might start to come out. And we might see, and seeing the consequences of these things. Again, consequences, not just rhetoric. Jupiter in Libra is a lot of rhetoric, a lot of ideas. People could say, well, but that's already been happening through the realm of ideas, but maybe sentences, people going to jail, like Harvey Weinstein going to jail. Some people who committed crimes going to jail. Trump, maybe not going to jail, but getting impeachment, or the stuff coming out and seeing it, and the consequences of these actions. That's what Scorpio brings. The consequences of the actions. Like the pain that you suffer because of what you did. The pain of it. Again, Scorpio is a tamasic sign. The pain of it. This is why this shift of Trump into Jupiter-Saturn at the beginning of the year, not a good sign. And that's right before the new Congress will be sworn in. So he goes into Jupiter-Saturn in early January. The new Congress, whatever is the result of this midterm election, will be sworn in shortly thereafter. Doesn't line up very well, right? The Congress is going to be sworn in right after he goes into Jupiter-Saturn. His Saturn is in the 12th with Venus. Again, secrets exposed, the secret truth coming out. All of this is 12th house. It's Scorpio energy. And Jupiter there is bringing justice. And again, if you're on the other side, though, you think this is all going to be deep state propaganda. But let's see how that holds up under the scrutiny of actual evidence and confessions and people getting indicted, because it's already happening. So right now, again, a lot of it swirls around. But what happens when proof actually comes out and people start in, and there's a trail, there might be recordings, there's evidence. evidence is much different than someone getting up and just making blanket accusations. It's real easy to get up and call it all the deep state and all that. It's much different when it's right in your face. You don't hear him calling Stormy Daniels deep state or paranoia. You hardly heard him say anything about that. Why? Because it was evidence. He never touched that. What happens when there's actual evidence that comes out? Because that's what's going to happen at some point. There will be evidence. And it'll be a lot harder for those, even in the Republican side, to say, oh, it's all just deep state, blah, blah. If there are recordings and videos and actual court, that's much harder to refute. And so we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens around all that. But these things are definitely set up. And again, as I said, with Trump's chart, he's got some grace because Jupiter's going to be going over his moon. But he's losing some grace because he's going into Jupiter-Saturn. So this could also show the justice for what he's done, especially the 4th house, and that Jupiter and the moon is the 12th house ruler. It could show someone getting the time's up with your, with your hidden secrets, including things like tax returns, because if the Democrats get the House, we're going to see his tax returns. And one of the most embarrassing secrets is going to be, you ain't got as much money as you said. That will come out. So he's about to have a lot of secrets revealed in Jupiter-Saturn. Again, Saturn is in his 12th house of secrets. So we'll leave it at that. This is going on for a while, but so we'll just leave it at that and look for another video where I will talk about how it relates in general to us personally. And I forgot to mention as well that I'm going to be doing let me put it here. I'm going to be doing the forecast for all 12 signs in the Astrology Training Lab. So if you want to see how that's going to affect all 12 signs, then you can try it for only 50 cents for 2 weeks. And you can, really, see how this is going to influence you. We're all influenced by this Jupiter going through Scorpio in a different way. I'm Gemini, so it's my 6th house. Someone who's Pisces, it's their 9th house. If you're Aries, it's your 8th house, and all of that. So that's also in the mix. So I'll probably do the one that's just about our own personal, like spiritual practices, and the more metaphysical Jupiter through Scorpio in a couple days. And we'll just leave it at that for this one. So you take care.